Welcome to the session on Coping in a Crazy World. I'm going to be your gracious host for the next 55 minutes or so. I'm Carl Aspler, and I understand this session is actually being video recorded, so how's my hair? Okay? Thank you. Okay. Anyway, I won't give you much of an introduction other than some of you have probably seen me before. So hands up, people who I've victimized here before on different things, Myers-Briggs or project management. Okay, so I'm going to try to find some new material for today. Okay, so today it's going to be a bit more of a lighthearted look at stress. And this is something actually that I began teaching 30-something years ago. It was the first training job I ever had, was teaching correctional officers about stress. And then probation officers, and then police, because I used to work in the justice area. You know, the Ministry of Correctional Services, which you probably know is that really funky, warm, friendly institution that brings you the prison system and the parole service and so on. And I've been doing it ever since to different audiences. So today we're going to get like a kind of an abbreviated version. You don't have to, if you have a question or a comment, just raise your hand, shout out, let me know. I know if I keep you eating long enough, there probably won't be any questions. So enjoy the lunch, and you should all have a handout. Everybody's got a handout to feel free to make notes on that. You know, there's going to be opportunities to write things down. If I really do a great job, I'll be available after the session to autograph your copy, or not. Or if at the very least, you'll think this is the most edifying training session you've ever had in your life, and there's going to be the sudden urge for everybody to get up and do a big group hug in the center of the room. All right, I lied about that. No group hug. Anyway, so we're going to look at sort of what, I guess the first question I could start out with is, oops, wrong button. What are some of the things that drive you crazy? This is, by the way, this is the audience participation part of the session. So what are some of the, just shout out, what are the things that make you mad, crazy, boil you over? Anybody?
When email doesn't work.
Email, okay. Yeah, I guess that happened today. Think of the good side. Nobody's complaining to you, right? Nobody's asking you to do anything. So there might be a plus there. What are some of the other things that drive you crazy? Traffic, okay, yes. Other things?
People who ask what's driving me crazy.
People, okay, well, there you go. Let me contribute to that. In addition to those people, what are some of the other things that drive you crazy? Family, yeah?
Go train.
The GO train. Waiting for things. Waiting. People that are too demanding. Okay, so I put on a list, because I didn't expect much audience participation when you're in the middle with food in your mouth. I actually have a list here of some of the things. There's no shortage of stressors or disappointments out there. We've got the bad drivers, we've got traffic, we've got relatives, children, co-workers, bosses, irritating people, unorganized people. By the way, all of those could be actually the same person, you know, the organized, dysfunctional, demanding people, unrealistic expectations, workload, technology. How's the technology working today? No, okay. Finances, health, you name it. And did I miss anything? Laundry, maybe, something like that. Anyway, so there's no shortage of things that's driving us crazy. So the focus is, how can we gain some control over that? Because we're going to be hit with this no matter what. Like, there's going to be a couple things that go on in our world. And one is, in fact, it's so crazy, I found this cartoon of the sort of birth on the left, death on the right, and then life in the middle. It sometimes feels like we're in kind of like some kind of wash cycle or id cycle, eh? Things are happening, at the other end, all of a sudden, it's over. Okay? So we're going to have a life full of crazy things. So a couple of observations. One is, stuff is going to happen, no matter what. Good stuff, bad stuff, things happen. We live in a realistic world. Sometimes we can see it coming, and sometimes it's going to take us by surprise. Okay? You're on your way to an important meeting somewhere, out of the office. You think you've timed it right. All of a sudden, there's an accident on the other side of the Don Valley Parkway, which shouldn't stop your side of the Don Valley Parkway, but it does. 40 minutes later, you're sitting there trying to get a hold of people, but your cell phone dead battery is dead. Okay? So there's going to be some things, despite all the best planning in the world, stuff is going to happen. In some cases, though, and this is kind of the pivot point of this session, is we can become our own worst enemy. I mean, let me ask you, when do you feel out of control? Anybody? When I feel out of control, when, finish the sentence. Anybody? Somebody? Is there anybody out there? Wave at me if you're there.
I procrastinate.
Okay, I'm out of control when I procrastinate, it's too late. Okay, what would be another example of when you're out of control? I saw the vestige of a hand raising over there.
Things don't go as expected.
When things don't go as expected, you get angry and you react, right? So sometimes how we can become our own worst enemy because how we react to what's happening to us can be worse than the disease that started it in the first place. Okay? And the key is, how do we gain some control? Because this is important. If we have a sense that we're in control, the stress is always less. Okay? There have been all kinds of studies that were done showing, I'll give you an example. People are being trained to fly aircraft, like fighter aircraft, off an aircraft carrier during rough sea. Taking off and landing on an aircraft carrier when the sea is going crazy. And it's two people in the aircraft. One's the pilot and one is the navigator, the other person. Who do you think has the most stress as the plane's coming in to land on a ship that's kind of going like this? The pilot or the navigator? Navigator. The reason is? His hand isn't on the joystick. He has no control over events around him. So theory is, if you could feel a sense of control, the stress is always less. In fact, you don't actually even have to have control. You just think you have to have control. This is where delusions can actually be a positive thing. You know? And there was actually an example. Imagine this room. This was a psychological study that was done. It was filled with students, okay? And looked just like this room. And there was a room next door filled with an equal number of students. And they were all given arithmetic tests, long division problems. Is anybody old enough to remember long division problems? You know, dividing 4 million into 7,000. It takes a long time. They were given long division problems to solve, and the same amount of time to solve it, except in one room, the group there was a control at the back of the room where people could actually control the volume of a loudspeaker. Because while they were doing their arithmetic problems, somebody was reading random numbers through the loudspeaker. Do you know how hard it is to do arithmetic when somebody's saying 4, 17, 21? So both groups had the voices reading out the numbers while they're trying to do their long division problems, except in one room, this room, there was a control knob to actually control the volume of this thing. Well, they discovered that, well, who do you think had the better performance when they turned the volume off? This room, right? Because they could turn the volume off. But when they didn't, they chose not to turn off the volume, they still had a much better performance than the team next door, because even though they didn't control the volume, they knew they could. Just knowing that you could control something is enough to sort of keep the stress down. So today, we're going to talk about how do you find control. How do you find control? We can't control everything. There's going to be health problems, there's going to be accidents. We will be bumping into people that are irritating and aggravating, who want to ruin our lives. So we can't solve everything, but what are some methods in which we could look for some control? So I have up here, is this making sense so far? Okay. We have choices, okay? Rather than just react to stress, which is what most people do. Oh my God, here it is. I'm a ship cast adrift on the sea of fate. What will I do, you know? And I want to hear, everybody should hear about my suffering, you know? Rather than that, if we know we have some choices, okay? So this is in the handout. One of the choices is, well, let me make an active job resisting this thing I don't like. I'm going to fight it, I'm going to resist it, I'm going to complain about it. There are times that you want to resist. So if something is a critical issue, violates one of your principal values in life, you're not going to give in. You're going to kind of fight for what you think is right. The only problem with resisting sometimes is resistance for its own sake, you know, just kind of can wear you down. You know, after all the worry and complaining and moaning, who ends up being the victim? Like, you end up being the victim at the end because it drains a lot of energy. But there's some circumstances when resisting is a good thing, okay? It might be an appropriate, especially if your interests are being violated and you feel you have to stand up for something. That's choice number one. The other choice is, let's hide out. Oh, here comes a new organizational redesign. Oh, here they come. Everybody into the storm cellar. Let's hide out till this thing passes. And that is also legitimate. I mean, when would you want to hide or avoid something that was coming at you, you know, some stressor? Again, audience participation.
Yeah, absolutely.
When? What would be an example when you'd want to avoid or hide out?
Well, I don't like what I perceive to be the outcome. I'm scared of what happen.
Right, so maybe you could get hurt. So if you feel like somehow the outcome is going to be damaging to you, you might want to avoid it. Like there's an expression that says, you don't want to go through life befriending mad dogs. Because in the end, the dog is going to kind of come out on top. So there may be times where avoidance is okay, or temporary avoidance. You know, somebody's blown their top, they're screaming, they're yelling, they're emotionally unstable. That's not a good time to do problem solving with them. You know, it's a time to withdraw and say, you know, I'll catch you tomorrow, in 2 weeks, never even, you know, if that's even possible. So avoidance. But that's a choice. We could wake up one day and say, you know, we could avoid the Don Valley Parkway at a certain hour of the day. That could be a conscious choice. We could avoid certain people or certain incidences that lead to trouble. Okay, so choice number 3 is control your reactions. Okay, how many times have you gotten angry over something and the person who angered you has moved on, but you're simmering for days? Does anybody, hands up if you've had that experience? You know, in the end, we can't control maybe what precipitated the stress, but we certainly can try to control our reaction to it. Does that make sense? So that's a choice. And the 4th one is just to go with the flow. Okay, this thing is, there's going to be crazy stuff happening. I'm just going to kind of like, I can't fight it. I'm not going to resist it. It's not going to help to complain about it. I can't hide from it. I'm going to kind of like manage it. You know, I'm going to do a little controlling my reactions and kind of just go with it, because in the end it's not going to kill me. And who knows, I may end up in a better place. Okay? And then finally, take control. So now take total control. In other words, when you initiate something that you want, you're in charge. Okay? The stress is less, considerably less. So this little list up here, I don't want to bore you with lists, but it's actually a hierarchy. It's a list, we could call it choices for control. And you could wake up one day when somebody irritates you or comes to bother you, one of these things that's driving you crazy, and actually assess in your mind, before I go flip out over this thing, let me kind of see, how should I react? Which ones of these should I try to adopt in the given situation? Or which combination? Maybe it's nice that, you know, I'm going to complain about it for a bit. I'm going to vent my spleen and moan and groan and tell everybody how crappy I feel and how bad the world is. But I'm going to let that go for 15 minutes because it gets pretty tiring to vent all the time. And then I'm going to sort of control my reactions and say, okay, Carl, settle down. And I'm going to see, how can I go with the flow on this one? Because I know it's going to end. And I know I'm going to come out the other end. So how I come out the other end is depending on kind of how I make my choices around here. So the first act of control is knowing you've got choices. And here's a couple of them here. Is this making sense? Are you still following me? Any questions? No? So far so good? Okay, so we're moving along. Okay, so one of the first steps to control is this thing around how we think. Okay, who we are depends on how we think. I'll give you an example. If my shoelace breaks on the way to a job interview, I could either say, oh my God, my whole self-image is compromised. I'm going to be late. He's going to see the dirty shoe or the shoe with the shoelace broken. Oh, I'll never get the job. I mean, people react like that. You know, little things happen and they go completely overboard. And it's almost as though there's somebody living in our head called Mr. and Mrs. Negative. Okay, when something happens, and I don't know why this happens universally, but it seems to be a universal experience that often the first place we go is, oh my God, this is terrible, you know? And we got a worrier in there sitting, oh, I'm going to worry, and somebody who's a critic saying, Carl, you're an idiot, you'll never amount to anything over here, and you got somebody at the back of your head saying, you know, there's no hope, people are hopeless, they'll never. So there's this tendency to be negative, and when we have negative thoughts, like these things on the left, whoops, here, this is going to sort of begin to dominate our behavior. So one of the things we should start thinking about is what kind of conversation we have when we're under stress. Because what we want to do is have more of these I-directed conversations. I can do it, I've done it before, I'm okay, I could control here, I will come out the other end in one piece, like everybody does, more or less. You still with me? Is it still semi-interesting, this presentation? Okay.